being a freelancer will never give you true freedom. And what do I mean by that? You might say, Caleb, well, being a freelancer, I get to choose my own schedule. I can decide which jobs I want to take. I have more freedom than someone working a 9 to 5. And to that, I'll say you're right in part, but I've come to realize as a freelancer, you can never have true freedom because you're always bound to the job that you have to work. And when you really start to think about it, it's almost more of a trap than a 9 to 5. Because as a freelancer, you gain so much more added responsibility. You have to make sure that you do your invoices. You have to cover your own insurance. You have to pay your own taxes. There are so many things that you now have to take the responsibility of as a freelancer that would already be taken care of if you were an employee working a 9 to 5. And you might say, well, Caleb, I'm cool with that because it gives me the freedom and the flexibility to work how I want to work and when I want to work. And to that, I'd say you're correct, but what is true freedom? Because similarly to the person working hourly at a part-time job, you still are trading your time for money. Similar to the person who's working full-time at a 9 to 5, you're still trading your time for money. And honestly, you can weigh the pros and cons, but you may be in a worse off position than somebody who works a 9 to 5 and has paid time off. They can still afford to take a vacation and get their full check. And you may say, well, Caleb, if you structure things right and you make sure that you have good money management, you can work 9 months out of the year and have the entire 3 months free. And you're absolutely right. I know people who do that. But is that true freedom? Or is that another way of building up PTO so that way you can use it all at once? I'm bringing these things to your attention because I was in this same trap of thinking that I had freedom because I was a freelancer, because I wasn't tied to the system of a 9 to 5. When in all actuality, I was putting more stress and responsibility on myself while not reaping the true rewards that should come along with it. And it wasn't until I really started to ask myself, what is it that I want to do, right? What is it that I want to do? What do I want to explore? How do I want to live? I'm currently in Medellin, Colombia right now, and it is January 2nd, 2026. 65 degrees, beautiful out here. I'm in a tank top at the beginning of January. It's currently 29 degrees back home. And I'm not losing any money by doing this.
Okay, man.
I have structures and systems in place within my business to where I can still make money even if I'm not physically at a location. I can still get paid even though I am in a different country. We have to get to a point where we can separate what we do with how we work. And what do I mean by that? The very first time that I thought I had true freedom as a freelancer was when I started. I've been a freelancer in so many different industries, right? Started out as a freelancer doing DoorDash. Actually, I started out as a freelancer working for my mother, who she works for a government contracting company. So that was actually my first introduction to being a contractor, right? And after that, I started doing Uber Eats, DoorDash, and doing a lot of gig work, right? And the pay was pretty low in terms of what I was putting into it, right? It wasn't like I was actually gaining a true profit based off of what I was doing. I was working 12 plus hour days. I was putting so much wear and tear on my car, so many miles, spending on gas. only to make $1,000 for the week. And when you really looked at the P&L, I was severely underpaid. I was probably not even profitable. When you factor in the time, when you factor in the wear and tear, the gas, all of these things. And it was at that moment that I was just living in survival, right? But I had the opportunity to work when I wanted and when I didn't. So I was given this illusion of freedom, this illusion of authority, this illusion of choice, because I could work when I wanted to. But what they don't tell you is that when you work, you get paid. When you don't work, you don't get paid. So I didn't understand the illusion that created for myself at the time. Because even though I felt this sense of freedom and this sense of authority and being able to choose my schedule, choose when I wanted to work, what jobs I wanted to accept, which ones I didn't realize that I was actually playing myself, right? And after I was doing gig work for a while, I started to get into the audiovisual industry because I had a family friend that owned an audiovisual company, and that just means we're setting up equipment for different live events and conferences like speakers, projectors, microphones, so on and so forth. And I started working with him, and I got into it as an audio engineer and a video engineer, and my pay went up significantly. At first, I was making about $20 to $25 an hour on average at DoorDash, and that instantly started to go up over time. Within about the course of a year, I was able to get my rate up to around $40, $45 an hour, just based off of me switching industries. So this created another layer of illusion to me thinking that I had true freedom. Because now I was making more. And if you looked at it on paper, me getting paid $45 an hour in that industry, they don't pay solely based off of the hour. They're in minimums, right? So half-day minimums and full-day minimums. And in that industry, it is 5-hour day or a 10-hour day. So if I'm getting booked for a full day, I'm making $450 a day. That was more than double what I was making in 12 hours with DoorDash. So I was thinking, okay, yeah, this is where I have to go. This is it, right? But just like any other industry, when it comes to freelance, there are cyclical seasons, right? So on paper, you do the math, you calculate it, $45 an hour, $450 a day times 5, right? If you were to extrapolate it across a full-time role at $450 a day, you're making 6 figures, right? So I was under the impression that, oh yeah, I get to make 6 figures, I get to work in an industry that I enjoy, I get freedom and flexibility. But that's not the case. That's just the illusion, right? Because when you really start to break it down, you recognize that the industry is cyclical. So you have your busy season, you have your slow season, and there are periods where you're just not going to find any work. You can make yourself as accessible, as skilled as possible to where people always want to work with you, but it does not get away from the fact that there's going to be times in the industry where nothing is going on and nobody is going to need to hire technicians or audio engineers or video engineers because of that fact that nothing's going on. So you might say, okay, well, yeah, Caleb, if you know that, why didn't you prepare for it? Valid question. I should have prepared for it better. But I think the decision that I made actually turned out a little bit better, because rather than me trying to prepare for it, what happened was it honestly catapulted me into something completely different, which there's a common pattern here. And I want you guys to recognize that the pattern is actually what's creating the illusion. So I went from doing DoorDash and Uber Eats, doing gig work, and then went from that industry into the live events industry as an audiovisual technician. My pay increased, my workload increased, and I was making more money. Yet there was still that illusion of freedom, right? I still had to be there to be the engineer, to be the person on site, to be the technician. There was no way I'd be able to get paid $450 a day and still be here in Medellin while still making $450 a day. So I went through a period of not understanding the cyclical nature, and even when I did understand it, I didn't prepare for it properly. And you can say that was a fault on me, which it was, but what that did was it put me into a cycle of highs and lows, and I never had financial stability, right? And you can say, well, yeah, Caleb, if you prepared and you structured things properly, you would have had financial stability. And you're correct, because I knew people in the industry who did things that way, right? When there were busy seasons, they made sure that they took advantage of everything, absolutely everything. So that way they were good during the slow seasons. They made sure that they didn't spend too much. They made sure that they had financial discipline, right? I was lacking in all of those things. And you can say, well, that was why you didn't have true freedom. And I'll challenge that thought, because I don't think that the freelancer mindset, identity, and ecosystem is built for true freedom. So no matter how much discipline you have financially, you have with your time, no matter how much you can steward the opportunities that are given to you, the entire ecosystem, framework, and identity of a freelancer is never going to provide true freedom. Because at the core of it, you are still trading your time for money. And so long as you trade your time for money, you will never experience true freedom. Maybe you'll experience it in spurts. You'll experience it in, even if you're really, really disciplined, in months at a time. But you'll never experience it as a lifestyle if you continue to be a freelancer. Now, we know that if you're a freelancer, you know what I'm talking about, right? During those busy seasons, you feel overworked, you feel stressed, but you're like, man, it's here, I got to take it while it's here. So that was me, but like I said, I wasn't financially disciplined, right? I wasn't preparing. I didn't put away money for my taxes. There were a lot of mistakes and a lot of things that I did wrong, but it was those mistakes and those shortcomings that actually pushed me into a different direction that has now afforded me the true freedom that I have today. And when I stayed in that audiovisual industry as a freelancer, I did it for 4 years. And there will still be time today where if I have nothing going on and, you know, there is a gig that pops up or there's something that I want to do, I'll take advantage of it. And the most I've made as a freelancer is actually pretty good, right? The most I've been able to charge based off of the skill set that I've built up and the connections that I've made has been $800 a day. Now you're going to say, whoa, $800 a day and you still couldn't get right and you're making $800 a day? Stay with me. So because of these highs and lows, I ended up going towards a adjacent industry, we'll say, right? Because it's not too far off, but videography. So we went directly into video content creation, video production, and that's where the hourly rate goes even higher, right? Because I was able to basically almost triple my daily rate of $450 to now over $1,000, right? To be a videographer. So I started to build that skill up and I became a freelance videographer. So now I was a true freelancer because I was freelancing in the video production industry and then also in the live events industry as an audiovisual technician. And this gave me another layer of illusion because I was looking at it and recognizing, okay, if I can just increase my rate, I'll be able to have financial freedom. If I can just increase my rate, I'll be able to make a lot of money, right? And I increased my rate to $125 an hour to shoot raw video. And I would add even more when it came to editing, right? And this was the point where I was at that intersection between being a freelancer and being an entrepreneur. And I don't say that in the sense of the actions that I was taking, but I say that in the sense of the identity that I had and the beliefs that I had about myself. It wasn't until I had gotten quite a few clients as a freelancing videographer, and I started to shift away from the idea of doing one-off shoots and all of these other things where there's no guarantee that work is going to be available, right? So I started to go after a retainer type of model. And this is when I started to actually find some stability, because I was like, okay, if I can get a client to work with me month to month for a set rate, then I can have predictable income month over month. And this is where I feel like a lot of people get stuck on that journey from freelancer to entrepreneur, because they'll say, yeah, I have clients and now I'm doing something consistently. But in all honesty, you're just going from a freelancer to a glorified freelancer, right? You're making more money, you have more notoriety, you have more authority, but you're still trading your time for money, which is the core of it all. There's no true freedom if you continue to do that. If you have to do that, you do not have true freedom. So during this time, I had a few retainer clients that were paying me pretty well, to where now I was making almost $10,000 a month consistently and predictably, right? And it got to a point where I started to get so overwhelmed and stressed because I was doing everything, right? I was always at the shoots. I was always doing this. I was always doing that. I had no time, right? Because what did I do? I traded my time for money. And I even traded more of my time for predictability, right? So now I'm working more than somebody who has a 9 to 5, because I have to take care of the administration things within the business, invoicing, client delivery, client communications, all of these aspects outside of just me being on the job. And then I have to also be on the job. And then there are so many things that consumed even more of my time. And I traded more of my time for predictability, because previously, when I was just freelancing regularly, there wasn't that predictability. So I became a glorified freelancer, right? And at this point, I thought I was an entrepreneur. I thought I had a business. I thought I was doing something right. But in all honesty, I was a glorified freelancer. And it wasn't until I really started to offload some of the tasks like editing and a lot of the other things when it came to client delivery that I started to realize, okay, I have to step back and assess what it is that I'm doing and where it is that I want to go. I've always wanted to have my time. I've always wanted to have location freedom. I've always wanted to have financial freedom. I've always wanted to have autonomy over my life. And it's just so funny, because it wasn't until I really looked myself in the mirror and said, we're not doing things right. It wasn't until I really came to that realization and that conclusion that I was not doing things right, that I did not achieve the goal that I really set out to achieve, which was true freedom. I had fallen into an illusion, multiple layers of an illusion of what I thought true freedom was. So at that point, I began to assess how to move forward. And I distinctly remember me coming up with a plan during November, because like I said, as a freelancer, you have cyclical industries, you have cyclical seasons, right? They're ups and downs. And November was a very, very busy season. And I was taking a lot of freelancer jobs, a lot of freelancer gigs, and my video agency was also getting a lot of jobs. So I had my feet in both pots and in both sides of the river, right? On the live event side, I was taking all technician jobs that I could. And on the video agency side, we were taking any shoots that we could in addition to the clients that we already had on retainer. And this is when I realized, yeah, I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't have a business, because when that influx of work came, I did not have the capacity to fulfill it. And I had to really, really reinvest into the business in order to properly fulfill it. Now, that was my first 20K month, right? In revenue, that was my very first 20K month, November of 2025. Or I'm sorry, October of 2025 was my very first 20K month. And during that month, I had to invest so much into equipment, into rentals, into labor, into all of these other things, because I never had those systems in place to be able to deal with that capacity. So that's another thing that you don't recognize when you're solely freelancing. You have the identity of a freelancer. I think that's the biggest thing. It comes down to the identity, right? How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a freelancer, or do you see yourself as an entrepreneur that owns a business that allows him to have financial freedom, location freedom, autonomy over his life or her life, right? Because it wasn't until I got everything that I thought I wanted that I got hit in the face with the fact that I'm not where I need to be. So in that process of me hiring people, of me investing in equipment, me investing in rentals, doing all of these things, that was when I started to recognize, okay, I can create a system around this to where I can remove myself from having to be on site, from having to take care of 95% of the client delivery, right? And then I also started to recognize I'm not valuing myself. I'm not valuing my expertise and valuing what I can bring to the table, because if I was, I would not just take any job just because it's a job and it's going to pay me well. But I would sit back and ask myself, as the CEO of this company, is this worth my time? Or is my time better off invested somewhere else? Because you don't recognize, when you're skilled and you're very skillful, you don't recognize how valuable your time truly is, right? And you'll tend to lease out that time to people who will pay you for it. But it wasn't until I started taking jobs where I felt bad about taking the job, right? Not because I didn't like the job itself, but because I felt like I was cheaping out on myself. I felt like I was trading my time for something that was not even close to how much it was worth, right? And this is making $800 a day. Making $800 a day, right? Anywhere from $450 to $800 a day. And I'm feeling internally like there's conflict, because I know how much more powerful and how much more valuable my time is now, and how much more I can propel the vision forward if I choose to do so with my time and not lease it out to somebody else who wants to buy it. So I went through that period for a little bit, right? Because I was in survival mode for the last 3.5, 4 years, right? Ups and downs, no financial discipline, not understanding how to do things properly, right? So I was like, I'm going to take absolutely everything. If I have the chance to hit a 20K month, I'm going to do it. And I thought that the 20K month was going to be what I needed. But really, midway through the 20K month, I started to realize that I'm not doing things right. I'm not doing things right. And there's no way I'm going to be able to repeat this 20K month consistently if I go about it in this manner. There's no way as a freelancer you're going to be able to continuously hit 20K, 30K, 50K, 100K months. It's not possible. It's not. There's a cap as a freelancer. And that's the thing that I don't think people realize, is that illusion of freedom. You gloss over the fact that there's a cap. And if you're comfortable with that cap, then so be it. But me, I wanted true financial freedom. I didn't want to have to worry about anything when it comes to finances. And there's no way I'm going to be able to achieve that as a freelancer. It's just not possible. It's not going to happen, right? So rather than me looking at the numbers and me looking at the revenue and me looking at my bank account for the month of October and saying, oh yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, I made 20K a month, I had to really peel back the layers and ask myself, okay, where's the conflict between the identity of me, who's the CEO, who makes 100K a month, lives in Medellin, could go live in Nairobi for 6 months, can go live in Dubai for another 6, can travel across the world, live in whatever society he wants, and still have the business running and still make money? What is the difference between that person, how he thinks, what he believes, how he moves, how he values his time and his decisions, versus the freelancer who's just stuck on trying to hit a 20K month or trying to make 6 figures in a year and having to plan 3 months out of the year to go travel, not to live, but to travel, right? I had to really sit down and ask myself those questions, and they were some pretty deep questions, and it created a lot of uncomfortable emotions and a lot of things that I had to challenge myself on, and I had to really unpack and dig deep on, because it really is an identity thing. And I think that's what traps a lot of people, is they don't see themselves as capable of being entrepreneurs, true entrepreneurs. The amount of money you make does not make you an entrepreneur. It's just a fact. The amount of money you make does not make you an entrepreneur. What makes you an entrepreneur is your ability to build a business, scale a business, and create an ecosystem where that business can effectively run without you having to be the glue that holds it all together. And I don't even want to say that, because you can still be the glue, but if you remove yourself, will it still run? If nobody knows who you are, will it still run? Will it still be successful? Can you exit from this business? Right? So I started to ask myself these questions, and I started to run through what this scenario looks like. And I asked myself, okay, how can I start taking these small incremental steps in order to shift my identity from being a freelancer to being a true entrepreneur and having true freedom? And I started to think of different ways, right? I started to reach out to my network, because as a freelancer, I knew a lot of other freelancers. So I started to reach out to my network, and I started to say, hey, I'm about to start having some gigs pop up or some work, what's your rate, da, 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 da. And this was a big shift internally, and this was something that I had to get over and overcome in my mind, because it was something that was tough for me in the beginning, but that was hiring people and paying people, right? And shifting from thinking about my own self-interest and thinking about the best interest of the business, right? Because I think that's another thing. That's the difference between a freelancer and an entrepreneur, is the fact that a freelancer, you only have to worry about yourself, right? Worry about yourself and your responsibilities, right? Whether that's, your bills, your lifestyle, family, whatever. But all you have to do is worry about yourself and your responsibilities. As an entrepreneur, you can't think that way. You have to think about the business, and you have to think about the team and the ecosystem of the business, right? Because now that you're bringing people on to work for you and work with you, that means that you now have to take everything into account. You can't just think about yourself. So it was difficult in the beginning for me to consistently invest money and time into bringing on labor and bringing people into my ecosystem of my video agency business, to where it could allow me that location freedom, that time freedom, that financial freedom, right? The ability to go out and get more clients, all of these things. I was so focused on profit margins, right? On every job that we would get. I was like, I would calculate the profit margin, and I say, oh man, I need it to be at least this percent or that percent. And it wasn't until I realized, like, okay, it may not even necessarily be a profit margin issue, because we were doing over 50% profit margins. We were averaging between 65 to 70% profit margins in that month of October, which is really good. But it's a volume thing, and you can't scale and you can't create more volume if you don't have the time to allocate to do that. So I started to hire people and bring people onto jobs. And I remember there was a particular job where there were supposed to be 2 videographers. And originally, I was going to hire 1 videographer and I was going to be the second videographer. But I had a conflicting meeting that came up. And I really did not want to bring on another videographer because I knew that was going to eat into the profits. And I'd already priced everything out and we already went under contract. But when I realized that I needed to do this so that way the job could run without me physically being there, I said it doesn't matter about the money, right? And this second videographer that I brought on was actually more expensive than I was expecting. But I did it for the simple fact that I knew I needed to have the ability to be on site or not if I want to, right? And I still showed up on site. But once the event got started, I went to my car, I took my meeting, and I did not shoot a single thing, right? And it turned out great. The clients loved it. It was a great product that we delivered. And that was the first time where I said, whoa, I can really do this. I can really make money without having to physically be at the location. I can make money and be in a completely different country. I can make money as I'm making this video talking to you. And that was mind-blowing to me. And the second thing that I thought was, okay, we got to figure out how to create a system around this, how to do this properly, right? And another opportunity came up because in November, I was going on a family trip to Nairobi, to Kenya. And right before we were about to go to that trip, there was another job that came up by recommendation, right? A random pop-up. And initially I thought, oh, no, I can't do it because I'm going to be out the country. But then I thought, wait, I can just hire somebody to go do it. And I think a big thing about that is being able to trust that people are going to follow through and do the right job. And this was going to be something where I wouldn't even be able to be there to oversee anything, right? Not just oversee and let the videographers do the work, but I wasn't even going to be anywhere. I was going to be out the country, you know? And when I saw that come up, I initially almost was going to just be like, no, I'm not available. I can't do it. But I took on that job simply for the fact that I knew it was an opportunity for me to shift my identity from being a freelancer to being an entrepreneur. And I said, yes, let's do it, right? So I already knew what this videographer's rate was going to be. So I decided to price everything accordingly, reached out to the videographer, got him on board with it. And because it's so interesting too, because it's like, it really expands upon itself, right? Because there's more than just me hiring them, right? Because I needed them to use my equipment because they didn't have the equipment that was necessary for that job to get done. So then I had to give this equipment to another colleague of mine, another, buddy of mine in the industry, and have him drop it off. And there was a lot of coordination and logistics and pre-planning that happened before the job even started. But all of this was happening while I was at the airport, right? I packed everything up the day before I was supposed to go to the airport, handed it to my friend, and then from there it was just logistics and planning. And it worked. It worked, right? I was in Nairobi looking over the most beautiful landscape ever. And then I get an email from the videographer letting me know that everything went great and the client loved it and they're going to be uploading the footage soon. And I was like, man, this is a different feeling. I'm sitting here with my family, enjoying Nairobi, my first time in Africa, and watching this just beautiful, beautiful landscape, the culture, the animals in the safari, and I got paid. And not only did I get paid, but there was an opportunity for somebody else to get paid too. And that's why I go back to what I said earlier. You can't just think about yourself. If you only think about yourself within your business, you're a freelancer. You're not an entrepreneur. If you do not take into account the best interest of the business and those that are within the ecosystem of the business, that means your employees, your contractors, your clients, whatever, that entire ecosystem of your business, if you do not put aside your own best personal interest for the best interest of the collective ecosystem of your business, you're not an entrepreneur. You are a freelancer. Because as a freelancer, you only have to worry about yourself and your responsibilities. That's it. You can be a team player as a freelancer, but when it comes to actually leading and running a business and owning a business and being an entrepreneur, that's the number one indicator right there. So if you sit and you reflect and you ask yourself, do I only think about my own personal interests whenever it comes to growing my business and running my business? You're a freelancer. You're not an entrepreneur. And I had to come to that realization. But coming to that realization would allow me to make the change for me to get true freedom, right? For me to get financial freedom, for me to have location freedom, for me to have time freedom. And I'm not going to say like everything is 100%, peaches and cream. But at this point, I have already set in motion the systems and the frameworks to be a true entrepreneur and to achieve the true freedom that I started doing this for in the first place, being a freelancer, right? As a freelancer, I fell for the illusion. And so many people get stuck in that illusion for their entire lives, and never come out of it. The only way to come out of it is to look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm not free. Or at least recognize that you're not free. And granted, if you're cool with what you do as a freelancer and, everything, then cool. I'm not speaking to you, but I'm speaking to the people who know that there's more that they want out of what they're doing as a freelancer. They know that they're destined for more. They know that they're capable of more. They know that what they're putting in and what they're getting out are in mismatch. And it's because of the identity, right? It's because you don't see yourself as an entrepreneur. Therefore, you can't think like an entrepreneur. Therefore, you can't move like an entrepreneur. You see yourself as a freelancer. Therefore, you think like a freelancer. Therefore, you move like a freelancer. And therefore, you fall for the illusion instead of achieving true freedom. So I say all of this to say, ask yourself that question. Are you a freelancer or an entrepreneur? Do you want to be a freelancer or an entrepreneur? Because only one leads to true freedom, and that's being an entrepreneur. If you want to fall for the illusion and stay a freelancer, it's completely fine. But like I said, I'm not speaking to you. This video is not for you. If you're fine with that, if you're comfortable with that, I have no judgments against that. Everybody's different. Everybody does what they have to do, It is what it is. I hire freelancers. I hire contractors, right? So there's respect. I've been in that situation. I've been a freelancer, right? I still, from time to time, may take a freelance gig. So don't take this as me coming at you if you feel some type of way. But if you do feel some type of way, that means that it might have ignited something within you that you either have been avoiding or you weren't aware of before. And maybe it means that you're really wanting to be a true entrepreneur. So just reflect on that, because as a freelancer, you'll never achieve true freedom. But the moment you switch your identity and you step into the pursuit of being an entrepreneur, you're now in the pursuit for true freedom, which can actually be attained.